Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. My fun research project has more existential risk than I anticipated. Episode 144.
So long as he's asking things anyways, is using direct prestidigitation for all of his wall writing purposes, in fact the sort of thing that trains his magical abilities at all. Keltham just started doing that at one point, but then every time he did it, he was in the middle of class, and it was the wrong time to stop and ask questions of Carissa about that. And at other times, he wasn't remembering to ask.
It'll probably make him better at prestidigitation. It might improve his spellcraft slightly, but spellcraft is one of those things where past a certain point that varies for each individual, you mostly only improve through deliberate practice, not through incidental exercise of the skill. Carissa at the World Wound made magic items for 8 hours a day, which uses lots of spellcraft, but then to actually improve at it, she'd spend another several doing exercises where she tried to build her scaffold with a missing rung or something.
Right then, what sort of exercises should he be doing? Has he in fact been practicing in anything like the right way at all?
Yes, he has been given and is doing all the right exercises for someone who is new at it.
Ah, okay then.
You'll get there. You're actually progressing very, very notably fast. If you were at a wizarding academy, you'd have them talking about how quickly that one learns and whether to move him up a year.
Notably fast for 18 intelligence and already knowing all relevant math and having security wizards, if not Carissa Sevar, watching him with arcane sight while he practices. Or just around as fast as that should be. Keltham is not unaware that he has protagonist syndrome and is monitoring its progress vigilantly in case it suddenly turns acute. Well, more acute.
Probably just around as fast as would be expected from that.
Not yay, per se, but his expectations remain calibrated in that case and don't need updating. Separate question, if renting goggles costs a couple of hundred GP for a day, does that mean their actual cost is over 72,000 GP? Because that's what you'd earn off them in 360 days per year, even if natural interest rates were 100%/year. Or does it mean there's some kind of huge extra cost associated with renting anything? And in the second case, can you rent them for a whole week for only 25% more money?
A big share of the cost, renting to a person you don't know well, is a guarantee that if they're lost or broken or cursed or something, the replacement cost will be paid. You can buy guarantees like that from the Church of Abadar. Rentals would be lots cheaper if they were to someone you trusted enough the guarantee wasn't needed. She imagines there's some relationship between the duration of the rental and the cost of the guarantee, but doesn't know details actually.
This sounds like a weirdly low-trust equilibrium for a planet with truth spells and priests of Asmodeus. Keltham suspects there's possibly something here about inadequate scales and institutions, like there's no central magic item rental agency that can form long-term customer relationships with people who could then rent lots of separate items, much more cheaply. Dropping spell silver costs by a factor of 10 is probably a more sensible thing to get started down its critical path first. And maybe there's not that much market to be unlocked, with lots of short-term, non-recurring magic item rentals. But it also could be the sort of thing where there's a lot of economic potential energy pent up. For want of institutions that can establish durable trust, wizards not making magic items that could be rented much more often, to many more people, more cheaply, while still making a higher overall rate of return. Well, he'll also focus on his spellcraft, though.
Would Alter Cheliax have a higher trust equilibrium? Taldor sure doesn't. Osirian? Someone check rental prices in Osirian. I would be pretty excited about magic item rentals, because I like making magic items. It would be an economic transformation that would suit me particularly. So, if you have more ideas on them, I'd be interested.
Well, the obvious startup idea, if this were Dathilan, would be to find everyone who has a magic item that they do not strongly need on a daily basis, nor need suddenly on demand, nor would be crippled by needing to replace, and have a single company, that is the organization all the lenders trust, to be loaned those magic items and to compensate them fairly for damage or loss. All the renters know that, when they need to rent a magic item for a period, they can contact that company and see what it's got. Instead of having a lot of isolated lenders and renters who don't have durable business relationships with each other, everybody has a durable business relationship with that startup. Depending on how the scale ends up working out, you can amortize teleport costs between rentals, like, instead of needing to teleport an item from Corentin to Ostenso, the item goes on the daily or weekly trip from Corentin to Igorian, along with all other items rented from Corentin, and then from Igorian to Ostenso, along with all other items rented in Ostenso. When items get requested often enough, the startup buys a copy of that item itself, instead of continuing to try to teleport it around. Zooming back out, the general question is how many magic items that somebody else would pay to use, that have daily uses or continuous uses rather than limited charges, are lying around somewhere being not already used on a daily basis, because that's a waste of that item. Also, or alternatively, which items would have daily or weekly rents high enough to quickly pay back the cost of their creation, even if there's no unused copies lying around. That's the economic potential energy within the whole system, a way that resources could be rearranged to generate higher earnings. And the question is just how to make the system slide down that potential energy gradient, like catalyzing a chemical reaction.
Permission to try that if I ever have enough free time?
I had it in mind as more of a project, but you could make a play for managing it, assuming you're not too busy from being my second on the entire project, which, in fact, you will be. If somehow the whole thing doesn't play out, and the contracts end, you can take the idea and try to run with it, sure. But there's a whole lot more advice out of civilization you ought to hear first, if you were actually going to do that.
Okay, I'll be patient. I just really like magic items.
Got any ideas for making that stinking spectroscope work? It'd be nice if we could check candidate skill at learning to manipulate electron orbitals with prestidigitation, and have a more objective measure of how good they were and how fast they were improving before final tier assignments. I have a couple of wacky ideas for getting the spectroscope running, but I don't want to contaminate you with mine.
Alchemy is not actually the area that comes most naturally to her, but she'll try to come up with some ideas. Alternately, if they were doing a magic item spectroscope, then she has tons of ideas, though it'd be very expensive and not a scalable solution.
Prototype first, scale later. But Keltham is under the impression that item crafting takes more than a couple of hours, and he is looking for a way to get it within hours. If he fails at that, it'll be time to drag out the magic item spectroscope plans.
Fair enough. They can spend some hours trying at the non-magical version.
Oh, he didn't say anything about it being non-magical, just that it wouldn't be a magic item.
Carissa is deeply tempted to cheat here by demanding advice from Avaricia, but she'll have to just try with her own more muddled understanding of alchemy.
Also, he thinks the whole thing with Carissa being impressive and correcting his spellcraft is, in fact, working.
Oh, good. Then he'll be delighted to hear she has yet more objections to how he grabs prestidigitation after he casts it.
He is, in fact, delighted. Making clear, verifiable progress is fun, and Dathilani are heavily shaped away from taking offense at corrections in their high-trust society where corrections are rarely offered for malicious reasons.
PL timestamp day 25/21, mid-afternoon.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. This is now day 3 of trying to build a spectroscope. Back in Dathilan, any startup that failed to build a prototype of anything in 3 days would be shut down by its funders as clearly hopeless. Keltham was specifically hoping to have a spectroscope on hand while evaluating hiring and tiering, so he could see who was making the most progress at learning to shift the electron orbital behavior of materials using prestidigitation, of color, taste, smell, stickiness. Their present situation may be summarized as follows. They don't have a professional glassmaker on site, nor on-site glassmaking equipment to build a prism out of optical glass. Specifying and ordering a prism from off-site would probably take several days, and probably not be quite right on arrival. They have a large piece of cloudy quartz that was successfully stone-shaped into the right rough shape of a prism, and then further cut flat with overkill magical slicing spells. Despite prestidigitation supposedly being able to change the color of things, Keltham has not been able to clear this quartz in a way that makes it suitable for use in a spectroscope's prism, nor change the flat surface of it into a diffraction grating. They have tiny pieces of nice clear quartz that would, if they were larger, probably work to build a spectroscope. Keltham's plan is therefore as follows. Step 1. Use their spectroscope to burn a piece of clear quartz and get a reading from the spectral lines off that. Step 2. Other people will practice. Prestidigitating bits of cloudy quartz, clearer, burning those under their spectroscope, and trying to shift the absorption lines of cloudy quartz towards being entirely the dominant spectrographic lines recorded from the clear quartz. Step 3. Prestidigitate their large-shaped piece of quartz clear and use it to build their first spectroscope. Step 4. Send their spectroscope back in time to Step 1. Now, Keltham isn't sure that part will work, but if civilization's teachings about the fundamental nature of reality are true, it shouldn't be that hard for him to use prestidigitation to create a small time loop.
Veto.
I agree in these objections.
If the only problem with the diamond is that it's too small we can get a true resurrection grade 1, they're about thrice as large across.
Why would you even say that in public, Keltham? Why in Pharasma's name would you?
The problem, Lady Everetia, is that they don't just need a size, they need a shape, and even thrice as large across would probably not be large enough.
Okay, he's trolling.
Correct. Though we do fundamentally have a problem where we could maybe use a spectroscope to build a spectroscope, but we don't have a spectroscope, and therefore can't use a spectroscope to build the spectroscope we'd need in order to build a spectroscope. Besides time travel, can anybody else think of an obvious solution there?
Gregoria's thinking she missed what was wrong with the solution, where they wait a couple days for a glassmaker to send them some attempts at following their instructions.
What I'm actually going to do is use silent image to create illusions of spectroscopy stations for everyone. If a silent image of a mirror works as a mirror, a silent image of a spectroscope should work as a spectroscope, or so I reason. If an illusionary mirror works as a mirror, a light exclusion hood should work as a hood, a light source should work as a light source, and a prism should work as a prism. I'll also create illusions of prisms the correct size and shape to do the job, illusions of evenly frequency distributed light that's good for testing absorption lines, and illusions of diffraction gratings. I'm going to maintain my concentration on that for as long as I can, and, before the spell ends, you need to manage to either prestidigitate quartz to clarity, or prestidigitate a surface to behave like a diffraction grating. If possible, also prestidigitate a light source to behave like an evenly frequency distributed light source, but that may legit be harder. And if we can't get that done today, take note of how far you got in deliberately shifting the frequency lines, where you started, where you ended up, and how much progress you made. Assuming, of course, that this whole clever plan does not completely, utterly fail on Step 0. Carissa, you said you had an illusion spell prepped, right? You're on learning to make your own illusionary spectroscopes that work, in case we're stuck with illusionary spectroscopes for a while, so that I'm not the only one who can cast them using my one first circle wizard spell per day. I mean, fine if you can teach others here after that, but you being able to learn it yourself would give us some breathing room. You have good concentration.
Sure, she'll try to learn that.
This seems like the kind of thing that couldn't possibly work, but they'll try it.
Cleverness results. Keltham's spectroscopy stations sort of suck. Not really in a way where they work per se, but maybe in a way where they literally work at all, and you can try to guess where the spectral lines might maybe possibly be. They can't get their shaped quartz clear to where it's better than the sucky spectroscopy station's illusionary prism, but they're getting it clearer. Carissa learned how to make illusions of Keltham's illusionary spectroscopy stations, and her illusions of his illusions are at least no worse. Diffraction. Gratings are really neat. Nobody besides Avaricia has ever seen that rainbow holographic sheen before on something that isn't an oil slick or in some cases an absurdly expensive magic item. But they can't prestidigitate a surface with that color well enough for it to work inside a spectroscopy station.
Ione will, at some point, wander over to the visible security and ask him if he's by any chance got a major image, or at least minor image, prepped today.
Security does have major image prepped.
If he can maintain concentration for a while, how about if they throw a major image specifically at creating an illusion of a clear glass, clear quartz prism, the same size and shape of Keltham's rougher silent image of a prism?
Sure, he can do that. They don't put you on security if you can't concentrate on an illusion and also do your job.
Great. How about if Sivar dispels just the prism part of the illusion that she's maintaining of a spectrography workstation, and then security puts his major image of an illusionary prism where that prism used to be?
Sure.
Carissa's illusion of Keltham's illusion of a light source sure is going into security's illusionary prism and making a nice rainbow on Carissa's illusion of Keltham's illusion of a display axis marked with unreadable wavelengths because silent image isn't fine enough for writing.
So, Sevar, do we tell Keltham we've got a working spectrography station and risk disturbing his concentration, or...
Use it to try cleaning quartz. I'll talk to him.
Huh. Somehow Ione wasn't expecting that much of a reward, that she'd get to be the first to use the spectrography station on quartz. Well, she'll go right out and try it then. But is not, in fact, the best at prestidigitation chemistry, as yet.
Hey, Keltham, is there a procedure for if I have a question that is mildly time-sensitive, but not important enough to disturb your concentration over, and I don't know how to tell if asking it will disturb your concentration or not?
Meta question too complicated. Just ask the object one, and I'll ignore it if it's also too complicated.
Okay, we added a security casting major image, got it working. Change any plans?
Assuming I'm still needed to go on concentrating for whatever reason, like my light sources are better, go have everybody else carry out the original plan. Otherwise, tell me I can stop.
Ideally, you go on concentrating on the stations, but not the prisms.
There's no way in the abyss he could have done that a week ago, but Keltham will try.
She'll focus very diligently on trying to match her illusion more closely to his, now that there's the spectrometers to make it clearer what the differences are. Once she gets that down, they won't need his.
Keltham's white light going through a security cast prism creates a rainbow that's smoother, more evenly lighted in every color, than Carissa's white light that looks exactly like Keltham's white light to the naked eye.
Weird. She will. Try to imagine her light different and see if any of the differences produce different rainbows.
Imagining her light looking the same white color tends to produce the same uneven-looking rainbow. If she wants to try imagining her light looking different colors, she can produce different rainbows.
What a bizarre constraint on the spell. What if she imagines her light is sunlight? What if she imagines it's firelight? What if she imagines it's dancing lights?
The rainbows of different lights sure are different looking. Sunlight's got a lot of green in it, and less blue than Keltham's source. Firelight is mostly orange and red, as you'd expect, but also has more green in it than you'd think. Not nearly as much as sunlight, though. Illusionary imaginary dancing lights cast a narrow light band that looks like basically the same color as dancing lights themselves.
What are you imagining as the light source to get a full rainbow?
Light source that's a fairly even mixture of frequencies, as produced by AM afraid to think too much about it right now, but I've seen it, so I know what it looks like. If you can't get it by seeing mine, try adding and subtracting light sources and colors from each other, maybe.
Fire and the sun and dancing lights.
To the naked eye, if she tries combining the illusions into one, it just looks like sunlight again. Maybe if she imagined the sun part to be less bright. Spectrographically, you can't really see the fire rainbow part inside the sun rainbow, which already had plenty of red and orange. But, yep, she can see the sharp line of the dancing lights in there.
She actually can't readily think of very many other light sources. Mostly light comes from fire, the sun, or her cantrips. Lantern Archon? Light cantrip, if it's different from dancing lights?
The illusionary Lantern Archon's rainbow looks like dimmer sunlight. An illusionary light cantrip is also a narrow peak of light, the illusionary cantrip's color.
Okay, she predicts she just actually isn't going to be able to imitate Keltham's light source until he tells her what it is. Though there's no reason not to continue to try various combinations, which she strongly expects not to get anywhere. Sunlight with blue dancing lights to make up for the insufficient blue? No, dancing lights are too narrow. Overlapping 100 hypothetical dancing lights at different points on the rainbow? She can't hold them all in her head.
Don't shut down the party just yet. Pilar is making much faster progress on prestidigitating things to burn in different colors, now that she's getting rapid feedback on the subtle results of anything she tries, instead of waiting for the first result visible to the naked eye.
Sorry, Keltham is actually going to lose concentration about now, and then fall over with a melodramatic ceremonial thud for several minutes before he tries talking to anyone.
Carissa will wait until he's recovered to ask him questions about light.
Right, so sunlight's going to have like hydrogen lines in there, and produces more green than blue to begin with. But the larger problem is that sunlight is missing a bunch of blue from how the air scatters the sun's blue light all over to form the daytime sky. Firelight, plus metal heated white hot, plus, ideally, metal heated blue hot, superposed, would plausibly work for the light source. If each illusionary component had realistic rainbows underneath the illusion. He's surprised she couldn't just copy Keltham's light directly. Maybe there's something here about, if you've seen a real thing, you can make an illusion of that thing. But if you've only seen an illusion, you can only make an illusion of how a thing looks to you, because that's what an illusion is. Maybe. If that made any sense. Or rather, if it made the correct amount of nonsense for magic. Keltham has a feeling, regardless, that Carissa might be well served by just messing around with this until she can control the light spectrum of illusionary light period. Get her magical control to where she's controlling the rainbow underneath the illusion, not controlling how the illusion looks to her eyes. That will plausibly be the equivalent of a spellcraft exercise for this, and might be preliminary towards being able to prestidigitate chemical properties. Though he doesn't actually know, the two manipulations would go through a common route. He's just guessing.
That does seem like the ideal end state. She has no idea if it's possible to feed your visual illusion as input something you can't distinguish visually, not sourced from any real source you're referencing, but constituted backwards from what it'd look like through a prism. But it seems like the sort of thing that you might have to try for a long time before you could be sure it wasn't possible, and where you'd learn something interesting from trying.
Possible step 1. Overlaying two different light sources to make a new light that looks the same as some other light, but has a different underlying rainbow. Mixing firelight and white-hot metal until they look the same color as sunlight, for example, adding more or less firelight to the mix, shifting the light's tone redder or bluer until it looks the same as the sunlight source. Possibly, if that's a thing you can even do. But trying to preserve the part where firelight plus metal light should have a different underlying rainbow than sunlight. Then practice shifting back and forth between Rainbow 1 and Rainbow 2, while keeping the appearance of the light source constant.
She hasn't actually seen white-hot metal. She's seen a forge, but the metal was not heated to the point of glowing white. She'll see if she can get there with light sources she's actually encountered, though.
Somebody's probably got a spell for it. It seems like the sort of thing that absurdly over-specialized for combat Golarian magic ought to do.
There's a spell that makes metal red-hot, which is suggestive, but she doesn't actually know of a more powerful version that makes the metal hotter. Her understanding is that it is sometimes used in combat, but was actually a failed attempt at a utility spell that could replace forging.
Actually, now that Keltham thinks about, he has a nearly white-hot metal sex toy. Might not work because it's just an illusion itself, but then again, it might? Or it might at least give her a light source that could be combined with firelight to make something that looks sunny but has a different underlying spectrum.
That'd be great. Some people are staring. What? In Alter Cheliax, that would be an extremely weird thing to overhear.
Oh, stop it. Do they have any idea how hard it is to do something that Carissa Savar will find even slightly scary?
Be timestamp day 25/21 evening.
Would Carissa Savar care to try to persuade him otherwise, before Keltham orders her off to his cuddle room to cuddle?
No, she wouldn't.
Didn't think so. Off with her then. Yep, definitely feeling closer to her now. They just have to remember to work on common problems, where Carissa can also be impressive, hopefully.
Well, I'm not expecting to have a shortage of those. Are you okay? Happy? Satisfied with the path we're on? Stuff keeps happening, and I just want to be sure that you feel like you're glad you're here, ideally, but if that's too high a bar, like you're growing closer to the true Keltham.
I am. A little sad about the Corva thing, but pretty happy about everything else. There'll probably be additional hiccups, and nothing will be as easy as it looks, and everything will take longer than expected, because that's just always true. But it feels to me like progress is being made. Things are within reach, I'm successfully using magic to cheat, and I'll be able to make enormous quantities of acid.
She is possibly more reassured to hear that than makes strategic sense. So much acid. I'm having a great time. But for me, way better than anything else that was ever going to happen is a much lower bar.
Not that high of a bar for me either, unless you count whatever Dathilon's future would have had to offer me.
Now I feel distressed at imagining the worlds where Keltham didn't die in a plane crash. I am pretty sure that is not a normal emotion, and I assume I'm applying the theory of worlds wrong, since you haven't actually explained it except in bits. But what if those worlds exist and he's sad and lonely?
They definitely exist, yes. Possibly most of the branching Kelthams, identical to him as of the moment of getting on the airplane, are still alive in Dathilon. People were saying at the end that they couldn't think of any better explanation for what took out the left wing, besides a meteor strike, and there's no way Keltham who boarded the airplane could have been precisely state-correlated with a meteor strike, that precisely pessimized. But that is not what Carissa is asking about. Not in the most important part. Nobody's hit him with an owl's wisdom yet. He still has a dream. He's energized and pursuing it. That counts for a lot. When he gets older and realizes what's actually going on in his life, he might be less happy then. But there's always the future, for everyone, except this version of Keltham, who is very rare, and even he got you, and Yaisa, and the project, and someday if Galarian can make its own version of civilization, this place's own future.
I think we can do it. Maybe it'll be hard, sure, but we've got forever, right? At some point we'll get around to it just because we were getting bored.
It's not quite something I can promise you, Carissa. If this place is wrong enough for me, in the end, if everything Galarian seems to be, in terms of how much it's suited for me, is misleading, then I might turn statue to wait on someone else making a future where I can be happy, or touch the Starstone, or go to my god's afterlife. Or, if all those things look not good enough for me, walk out of this reality entirely through Abaddon to see what's next in the sequence. Even Dath Elon doesn't want to be so lawful good, is actively pushing against an extreme of lawful good, that people are told to live on somewhere they're unhappy for somebody else's sake. If you don't want to live in the now, you leave the now to the people who do enjoy living there, and go on to the future. Everyone gets told that. Nobody is to think that they're trapped. Nobody is to think that they need to live for somebody else's sake. Nobody owes that to anyone. That's part of the point of cryopreservation.
That makes sense, but I am having a hard time fathoming the person who'd benefit from hearing it, because wouldn't everyone want to exist selfishly, the way you want water when you're thirsty or air when you're suffocating? Why would you have to tell them they shouldn't drink when thirsty just to appease other people?
A number of strange people in Dathilon do not, in fact, want to exist, even in the future, and don't want anything else to exist either. And they started visibly planning to shut the whole thing down. Civilization, I mean, by having lots of kids who were like themselves, so they could become a voting majority and vote to exterminate all life. And there was a big fuss, and the keepers negotiated with their leaders, and their leaders all told the non-leaders that a deal had been struck, and all of them should just go into cryonic suspension and let the keepers keep the mysterious deal. And that was really, really flaming creepy. So there was another large fuss. But, being the sort of people they were, they accepted that and went into cryonic suspension, regardless of the fuss. So, yeah. It actually makes a lot more sense to me. Now that I realize that among the things the keepers must have told them was that it was literally impossible for them to stop existing, and true suicide would throw them into a dangerously unknown distribution of universes. So that's not even the question. The question is just, do you have to exist now? Or can you just step through time and exist later instead? And nobody who's not having fun in the now is obligated to stick around in the now.
But you exist less, right, if you spend a bunch of time not existing until the future. Also, I am mentally setting that story aside to be horrified about later, since it doesn't seem very helpful right now, but I'm horrified.
Well, you had your version of the Rovagug problem, and we had ours. And I'm sort of not getting the exist less part. If you offered to suddenly inject a bunch of reality fluid into me and have me exist 5 times as much for the next week, I wouldn't be particularly excited about that because, from my perspective, it wouldn't feel like anything to exist more. It's not like getting to go on an additional date with you. It's like going on the same date, but there's 5 times as much of it. If a Keltham has such a thing as a natural lifespan, even in a world with souls and the chance of godhood, it's determined by how much time he can spend being Keltham before he gets tired of that. Why spend that limited time you have to be yourself, before you have to move on and become somebody different, experiencing not having fun? Also, in a certain pragmatic sense, if you're going to live for billions of years before the stars burn out, and then, I guess, move on from there by death travel, after your universe gets cold, are you really existing that much less if you skip over a couple of unhappy decades to get to the future a few centuries later?
Maybe I've just never not been having fun, but that doesn't sound right somehow. I think I won't get tired of being Carissa, and if that's a failure of imagination, I'd get tired of being Carissa once I've explored all the states Carissa can be in, including the ones which aren't fun, and learned all the things I can learn from them, and grown all the ways they opened up to grow in. And so time not having fun isn't stealing from time, that is... And I guess if my lifespan is infinite, it makes no sense to be defensive of any specific decade, but I guess I don't feel sure enough it's definitely infinite to stop clinging. And can someone ask snack service whether it serves Asmodeus for me to try to explain the interaction where I tried to dare Abigail to torture me until I wanted to die? This feels ridiculous, but also she's pretty sure it's the right question to ask and the right person to ask it of.
Snack service says that this isn't one of the points where it has instructions about which rounded rectangle to select. I have no idea what that means either.
That's upsetting, and she'll process it later. I have a potentially relevant thought, but it's about Abigail and something I otherwise might not have told you for many more months. Yes or no?
Maybe. Not for now. I feel like I'm pushing around as fast as I should be pushing on my sadism and evil, and we did want to put some governors on how emotional our cuddle room conversations end up.
Okay. The reason your Rovagug cultists strike me as more horrible than ours is that ours didn't have children they thought would be broken like them and not want to exist on purpose, which seems worse than just being excessively good and thinking you should do all existing people the favor of destroying them. Not that that isn't quite bad.
They weren't having fun themselves, but they considered the prospect of civilization growing to colonize other stars, and eventually disassemble other stars for raw materials, and there being trillions and quadrillions and septillions of people having fun, to be a much more horrifying problem. They said their children would understand and agree with them, that it had been worth the disutility of bringing them into existence, so that they could take up the vital cause of exterminating all life before it was too late and the universe ended up with sentient life all over the place. Which, it's sloppy generalization, and a generally invalid form of argument to say that you could have solved a problem using a particular heuristic, and therefore that heuristic must be right across all cases. But still, one would have preferred them to go with the heuristic of people not having a duty to stick around where they're not being happy.
Or the heuristic of just doing what you actually want and not being good, but I guess I can see why Dathilon doesn't want to tell people to adopt that one. Shiver. Existing is great, and it feels like this is some kind of fact I could explain if I found the right metaphor, even though it can't possibly be.
Yeah, I think that's just the utility function. Probably, in the end. We're not coherent and we don't know what our values are. We can learn facts and arguments that change what it is we think we want, and even what it is that we actually want. But all of that is ultimately inside a framework that you're born with, that can never become known to you. And there was a very long and very hard-fought argument inside civilization between the negative utilitarians and everyone else, before both sides came to accept that the other side wasn't making a mistake. The negative utilitarians didn't want conscious life colonizing the universe, if that meant running a risk that people in any significant numbers would ever feel any amount of pain and unhappiness, even a small amount. That was, so far as anyone could tell, just their utility function and their framework they'd been born with. if it had been a question of the very smart people coming up with the right argument to talk them out of it, everything would have been simpler and much, much less creepy. This is all before I was born, by the way, but an endlessly famous part of history because it's like one of the greatest moral stress tests that civilization was ever subjected to, and it generated so much drama, and the way it ended sure did not help.
It sounds creepy and terrifying for all the people who thought that faction might win and murder them all.
I doubt that was ever in the cards. I don't think the people of civilization would have let all intelligent life be ended over their commitment to democracy. I don't know whether you'd call that good, or evil, or lawful, or chaotic in Galarian's system, but it is who they are. The threat that the negative utilitarians held against civilization was that civilization would have to put aside democracy to stop them, if they just played out the game the obvious way that was there for them to play it, to end all life. That was their negotiating leverage, that civilization could either give up on its system of law and property to stop them, or bargain with them that nobody would ever be allowed to suffer in the future, not even the smallest bit of pain. The Keepers took a third alternative, and yes, incredibly creepy, but nobody called them out on it being wrong, given that it was apparently an option.
I mean, if they just explained to them that there's life everywhere and civilization seems way more concerned than most of the rest of it with avoiding suffering, then that's not even very creepy except for how it's secret. I hope they didn't commit civilization to try to stop other civilizations that have more pain in them because of having different kinds of people who want it and grow from it.
There's not life everywhere in Dathilan's universe. Calculations suggest the nearest aliens are 500 million, 2 billion years away, by the fastest you can travel in a non-magical universe, which is the speed of light, which is around 300 million yards per second. Very loose figures in Galarian units.
But if you're going to be good at all, why limit yourself to caring about one universe?
Can't see and touch the other ones by any known possible means.
Maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. I'm not good and haven't worked through it much, but if I think there are only 1,000 people, and that it'd be better if they didn't go turn into 1 billion people so you kill them all, that's one thing. But if there are infinite people, and there's a group of 1,000 of them that's going to turn into 1 billion, and you kill them to prevent that, and there's still infinite people, that seems even stupider.
Our cuddle room conversation is literally getting into anthropics at this point. But I'm a finite fraction of everything that exists. You're a finite fraction of everything that exists. If we were an infinitely tiny fraction, we'd be somebody else instead. I'm no doubt a much tinier fraction now than when I got on the airplane. This does not bother me.
That would definitely bother me. It sounds like you're saying it's not bad to be murdered if the murderer first spins a coin and only murders you if it comes up heads, but it definitely still seems bad.
You're probably like 2 trillion times less real than my last girlfriend.
And I would like to be more real than that. I might not know how to get it, but I still care about it.
Think your 3 options here are to create a lot of copies of yourself, become a god, or investigate whatever weird, disturbing options Galarian might have on offer in the foundations of its reality, if those have any cracks or flaws.
3 seems risky, but 1 and 2 are both appealing once I know how to pull them off.
I have straight up never gotten the thing where some people say they want there to be more copies of themselves, which I guess is good, because otherwise I'd be incredibly sad about however much of my reality I lost in the plane crash.
It seems like only part of it being good by my values that I exist is that this specific thread of consciousness gets to experience existing, and the other part of it is some other thing to do with characteristically Carissa thoughts and experiences happening, and the other thing is more satisfied if I exist more. But I will admit I haven't thought about this much. That said, I'd have a hard time being sad about the plane crash or about existing 2 trillion times less than your last girlfriend, because that wouldn't change it any.
Does it make a difference if I say that my last girlfriend wasn't a wizard, wasn't a masochist, would not have been as difficult to injure by biting, lived in a world where spellcraft didn't exist, and all of these things are because she was so much more real than you or I am now? Would you become 2 trillion times more real at the price of your magic?
Good question. I don't know. I rather want to ask Subirax if Asmodeanism has an answer, actually.
You're not allowed to leave the cuddle room yet. There's still an internal jarring each time he says something like that. And yet, it is comforting that she can be here just because he wants her to be here, safely, without cost to him.
She beams at him. Yes, Keltham. Anyway, there is a teaching that mortals are specifically bad at reasoning about really large numbers, and devils aren't. And so it seems possible that once I am perfected as a devil, I could tell you exactly how much realness I'd trade for how much magic. And it seems further possible that hell could tell me already, to at least moderate accuracy. But I am yours, and submit to you in the matter of whether I should ask about that.
I know how to reason about large numbers, which is only a matter of knowing how to carry out a whole chain of reasoning, using numbers on every step. But in this case, it's not about the large number part of it. You value your experience of magic. You value there being more Carissa-like things that are real. If your value on the second thing scales linearly and is currently strong enough for you to notice it at all, you'd sacrifice your future experience of magic to become 2 trillion times more real. Hell doesn't need to do the part where it reasons about large numbers. Hell needs to know whether your currently stated preference for there to be more reality in Carissa-like things is a valid part of your idealized utility function, and one that grows as an independent component without limit until it trumps the part of your idealized utility function that wants to go on experiencing being able to do magic. And, I would personally say, giving up your sense of joy in doing magic, because you had a sense that you ought to be obligated to become 2 trillion times more real, even if you couldn't feel that at all, from the inside, even if what became 2 trillion times as real was the sad Carissa who lost her magic. That does feel to me like it has something in common with the thinking of the people who thought they had go on existing in the present in order to destroy the future. There's something of goodness in caring too much about what's real and having that drown out how things feel to you.
That's a very interesting answer, and maybe also Hell's answer, in which case I'll believe it. But 2 trillion Carissae would get to do so many things. I love magic, but I am sure I would love other things too. And there'd be enough of her for all the Kelthams around, and I'd be a little less always on the brink of being gone, and Hell's answer might also be that. I'm not sure. Not that I'd be obligated to give up magic for there to be more of me, but that I'd chase the opportunity until I caught it, if I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Also, it's not like there wouldn't still be a Galarian Carissa who did magic, right? Just, most Carissae would be ones born into worlds that exist more, like worlds without magic or that didn't have an Earthfall.
I doubt my last girlfriend existed in more different places than future Carissa Seavar's will, over, say, the next subjective 1,000,000 years. I'd guess she'll probably exist in fewer distinguishably different places, because her reality is more densely concentrated. Or on a macro scale, I expect the different Dath Elans end up less diverse than the branching Galarians. I think you're confusing the question of how many importantly distinct versions of something there is, with the untranslatable of being any one of those versions. Probably some of the most individually real consciousnesses in all of reality are incredibly simple minds in simple universes that stay on single tracks and never branch.
Does anything important depend on how I answer this question, or should I just drop it until I am older and wiser?
I mean, we lead strange lives, so I cannot guarantee you will not suddenly be offered a chance to become 2 trillion times more real at the price of your magic. And come that day, it might be important for you to understand that this is not at all the same thing as creating 2 trillion importantly different versions of yourself, having diverse experiences. But, I mean, if you turn out to have the option of asking me first, you probably should. Oh, and you asked about permission. I should answer explicitly. No problem if you can afford the comms bandwidth someday to ask Hell about it. But I predict they answer that they need an unmanageable amount of detail about your psychology. Or say, 85% likelihood that if we knew everything about a random fourth circle wizard, we'd tell them blah blah blah. But it's incredibly hard to actually learn for individuals.
She bets they won't, because Hell doesn't care what she values, but what they value in her. But, yeah, they might. I'm still curious. Thank you.
It'll timestamp day 2622.
3 of the 12 candidates are not being hired. It's easier the second time. Maybe also because this group wasn't friends with each other the same way as the Ostensos. He doesn't have the same sense of splitting people up by assigning them different fates. A note from Corva says she's fine working for Asmodia and would prefer to skip her exit interview. The cleric of Asmodeus accepts without changing expression that he can best serve Asmodeus by staying on in this fortress as a staff cleric, against their potential future need for a security-cleared pure mathematician. He accepts the project's offer to him for the option value on that without negotiating. The final rejected candidate says she's totally taking the hell option, since Cheliax is offering a free round-trip ticket there and back.
No, not actually. She'll just be a statue for a bit.
9 of 12 are hired. Lady Avaricia is the only immediate Tier 1 among them. Keltham has his eye on some of the others. They haven't had as much attention and law lecturing from him as the first 12 got during their first week. They should not necessarily despair at not being promoted to Tier 1S yet. Keltham does privately feel surprised that there'd be Asmodia and Ione out of the first 11 Ostenso students, and Maritzel, though she is not quite looking to be in that same class at the moment, and only Lady Avaricia to clearly outperform the rest of a supposedly much more elite candidate class. It does seem a bit tropey if he doesn't just need to offer them more training. Or maybe these people have too much existing expertise and too much achievement in a narrow field and not enough being random, very smart kids ready to learn.
Lady Avaricia is so incredibly unsurprised by this. What are they doing next?
Tier 2 is acceptable for the moment. Once the field shifts from mathematics to crafting, Alexandra will demonstrate his skills and Keltham will amend his folly.
Willa should be thrilled to have succeeded, but it tastes like failure. It's not the shares and the money from shares that really matter, even though it's really possibly quite a lot of money and it probably should. It's the having lost to Avaricia of all people. It's the thrill of the test gone to ashes. It's the implied promise that the Tier 1 girls are the special ones. It's painful to think about, that she might just be in the background, forever. And it's not the kind of thing you can work harder to fix, because she's already been working hard. She doesn't have some extra gear she can tap into that she wasn't already tapping. But she very much wants to be distracted right now. Maybe they'll do more science today. And if not, there's always obsessively playing with every aspect of prestidigitation.
They're not done yet, signing agreements-wise. Keltham has now produced a non-disclosure agreement between the project's employees, including himself, and the professional alchemist, if the professional alchemist is willing. Keltham sent it off to Cheliax last night, and they made a few corrections that seemed fine to Keltham, and sent it back, signed on their own behalf this morning. Cheliax is signatory because the NDA also binds, for example, nearby security, and anybody who's allowed to read transcripts.
The professional alchemist wanted a long time to read it very closely, but eventually declared it satisfactory.
Yeah, cool. Keltham admits to being interested in what was worth the protection.
He does temperature reading with his familiar, a vampire bat, which has heat vision, and which he trained to distinguish fairly fine detail in heat, down to 10% of the difference between freezing and boiling water. He also has some secret processes he'll show them, but that is most of his competitive edge.
That does not particularly sound like it would scale, but it will, during the prototyping phase, plausibly save them some time, if they're ready for the SO2 and GT, SO3 step before Keltham otherwise invents a thermometer. Anyways, welcome to Project Lawful. They probably don't have everyone they need. Now, they're probably also going to need a smith or a glassblower or who knows what else, but they've got enough to keep on storming ahead in what is hopefully a forwards direction. For now that they have basically functioning spectroscopes, they can start learning to modify spectra of light, rather than just the way illusions look to the naked eye, modify electron orbital levels rather than just the colors that materials burn, and by doing exercises like those, hopefully, graduate to being able to modify the chemical properties and most probable reaction pathways of materials via their understanding, and not just hammer from outside on their color, smell, or taste. The road ahead of them will not be easy. Not trivially easy. Definitely. Possibly quite hard. They'll be performing magical manipulations that don't just do what they want right away, and instead push on weird, invisible properties that can only be measured indirectly, in spectroscopic properties or reaction rates. They'll have to hone their exercises of magical power until they actually do much of anything predictable at all, and then by observing the little they can observe, often after the fact, they'll have to figure out how to affect complex systemic properties in a way that adds up to a functioning pathway of chemical transformations. There's math that can guide their way, but only partially for understanding particular steps. They can't just calculate everything they need to do. In other words, just like being a wizard apprentice all over again. Only this time, they will become matter wizards, and then use their matter wizardry to produce enormous quantities of acid. Then magically perfect in the reaction pathways to refine spell silver cheaply out of less expensive ore. Drop spell silver costs by a factor of 10. Probably do some other stuff too, but also get started on making more intelligence headbands for new wizards who can make more intelligence headbands. And now, begin.
Timestamp day 27, 23. PL timestamp day 28, 24. PL timestamp day 29, 25.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.